This is Richard Samelka. This presentation I am entitling the Immune System Dysregulations, Cause or Effect. Now, the first question you may have is, well, how many of us have immune system dysregulation? The answer to that is simple: everyone. Now, the subtitle of this is Cause or Effect. Is any particular entity the cause or the effect of the immune system dysregulation? And where that is important is it then would tell us, if we know what the cause is, then what the root cause treatment would be. What is the entry point into this nebulous cloud of immune system dysregulation? Now, the good news is the majority of people have very mild to minimal immune system dysregulation, and it's a function of living in the modern age with all the pollutants that we have, our immune system has to deal with. So I'm going to have to read my notes on this introductory presentation because there's so many topics and I don't want to leave out any important one, and just naming the topics may occupy the entire time, but I'll hopefully finish with the starting points of treatment. Now, each one of these topics have their own school of thought, have their own experts, many of them gurus in these experts, in these areas of disease. But I think that everyone, once you're in the immune system dysregulation pool, you kind of probably have most of them. So we'll get to all of that. But I'm going to list the most important ones, basically, that are in the news and have the most members in different groups on the internet on. So the category of mental health. So depression, probably the largest thing, but obsessive compulsive disorder and all forms of mental health. And that's where I think the school of thought of meditation is important. But, and I'll address this in future things, you have to come to your own approach to calming yourself down. And I'll get to that again. Diet, the microbiome. Important condition in this is a metabolic disease syndrome, and in imaging, I refer to it as the splanchnic inflammatory syndrome, and that we can identify with MRI, although I think only myself and my colleague in Lisbon know how to do that at this point in time. Next, the subject of multiple chemical sensitivity syndrome, which means you're simply sensitive to a whole bunch of different chemicals. Then mold next, and that's a huge topic that people have focused on. How often is it the entry point, and how often is it the effect of having immune system dysregulation? I think probably most of the time it's the effect of having immune system dysregulation. Next is the category of mast cell activation syndrome. And I would add to that all of the other little things, some of them actually very big, like fibromyalgia is big. Maybe that should be a separate box from this, but when you think of cytokine release syndrome, chronic fatigue syndrome, and so on, that's all in these categories of some kind of immune cell issue. Next is Lyme disease. Next is long COVID. Now that's really a much broader category, which would be chronic viral infections, and cytomegalovirus and Epstein-Barr, two others that are quite common in that category. Next is long COVID vaccine syndrome. Again, you can add to that a reaction, a chronic reaction to any vaccine that you receive. Next is the topic of drugs in general as the entry point to immune system dysregulation. And the one perhaps most talked about is ciprofloxacin as the entry point. But many drugs can cause immune system dysregulation, especially to pay attention to any drug that actually principally affects the immune system. Now, that will be an interesting complication of basically all modern trend of drug invention for cancers, where we look at modifying the immune system, which I think is great, and I'm a huge believer in that, but we have to pay attention to not everyone will have their immune system managed and properly targeted by these immune drugs. A certain percentage, it will have different effect, and maybe in fact the opposite effect. It's a reflection well, things are complicated, and not everyone responds to things the way that one anticipates they should. Next category that we're all dealing with, and that's why we all have some immune system dysregulation, is general pollutants and toxins. So all the pollutants that I've generally talked about in the past, and these occur, of course, include nanoplastics. They include PFAs. They include then many additional toxins related to insecticides and so on. And the category that I finish with is actually the one that has been the entry point that not only is my entry point into looking at this entire subject, but the entry point that I have focused on. Now, the large category is heavy metals. Now, in distinction from many of these other, or perhaps all of these other categories, or nearly all, is that it can be directly treated to near cure, because we can, in principle, remove these metals from the body. Now, that we've achieved very well with gadolinium, and that has been my entry point into the whole concept of immune system dysregulations. But I've, for better or worse, for me, have found myself dragged into the entire subject of immune system dysregulation. So it turns out my entry point, the entry point that I focused on my patients, is where gadolinium is the entry point into immune system dysregulations. What we do with gadolinium is also ideal treatment for lead. So those things we now have treated extremely well with a combination of removal by the best available chelator, IV-DTPA, with at the same time moderating and diminishing the immune reaction with steroids and antihistamines. Now, it turns out the steroids and antihistamines actually treat most of these other entities as well, and that's why I've said that the response to that by starting with treating heavy metal, it has salutary effects on everything else. But the reality is everything else has to be addressed as well. So I'll finish with the starting point for basically all of these immune system dysregulations. And I should have had as a separate box stress, which I guess is really in the first thing I mentioned, which is mental health, but stress could almost be a separate entity. So the first thing to focus on is calming down. And by calming down psychologically, you also will calm down the autonomic system, which you also want to have calmed down, but they can be separate. I think the concept of considering them together is important. And the next point is kind of obvious, but avoidance. So the parentheses of avoidance is as best you can. So that's where we're going to introduce this subject. Thank you very much for your attention.